And welcome. Good afternoon to everybody out there, and thanks for coming. Gail mentioned the name Jerry Morawski, a real good friend of mine, and Jerry came to me about, what year is this, 2024, 25 plus years ago, and asked me to help him with a presentation on Roby Speedway, and he was having some issues with his eyesight, etc., and we helped him, and we put together a PowerPoint presentation on the Speedway, and I hope you folks enjoy it. Roby Speedway, we mentioned on the opening slide there, 1920 to 1936. That's a good picture of the racetrack. I hope the sun is beaming in, a beautiful day. Maybe it should have been a little cloudier today to see the screen, but this picture came out of the program, their souvenir program book in 1936. So this is a picture is actually about 1935, and if you look closely, there's the main straightaway, and right there's the old Falstaff, one of the breweries, and then if you look a little farther, you can see the power plant there at one time. It was located between 108th and 112th Street, just west of Indianapolis Boulevard. It was a 1 mile dirt track, full 1 mile track, operated from 1920 to 1936. And the backstretch ran probably just west of State Line Road, and or should say east of State Line Road, parallel to it, and probably 100 feet or so. So some of them homes are still standing there, and right outside their doorstep was this racetrack. And as I mentioned, it ran until 1936, and it closed, and stands were condemned. The track was torn down in 1937 or so, but you could still see some aerial photos of the track, remnants of the track in 1952. Roby Speedway actually started, was part of 3 tracks in the area here. Racetracks, horse racing tracks, Sheffield, Forsyth, which was also called Lakeside, and the Roby track. And the Roby track was built in 1892. And how these tracks came about is Illinois kind of put the damper on horse racing. So various people, gamblers, etc., from the Chicago area said, hey, Indiana is right there. We'll bring horse racing to the state of Indiana, which they did. And construction began of the Roby track in 1892 with the first horse racing program held in November of 1892. And this kind of gives you an idea of where we're at here. There's the Roby track right there. And here's Whiting, 119th, maybe right in here. There's the Sheffield track, and there's the Forsyth track. And this is how it looked around 1900, well before automobile racing started. If you have any questions, feel free, or comments, just feel free to jump in here. Roby Speedway, another nice aerial shot. There's the Speedway. There's 112th. There's the old 108th Street. State Line we mentioned, there it is, and there's some homes there back in the day. I don't know, Jerry, can you see Iris's house in there maybe? Also this Southsider. The grand opening for the new Roby Speedway was August 1st, 1920, and they had motorcycle racing that afternoon, and $500 in prizes were up for grabs for the two-wheeling racers. The first automobile racing program was held on August 29th, 1920. And to promote this whole deal, they gave away 3 brand new 1924s. Pretty impressive for back in the day. That was October of 1920. The track's first promoter the early promoter was George St. John. I think, is there a few seats in the back still? Maybe? Come right ahead. So get three new cars being given away was kind of a big deal, and it drew a lot of people that afternoon. There's an ad out of the Hammond Times, 1920, mentioning the grand opening motorcycle race meet at the old Roby 1 Mile Speedway, 108th and Indianapolis Boulevard. 6 big events, $500 in prizes, speed, thrills, and spills. Here's an early shot of Roby Speedway of automobile racing. Grandstands look pretty packed that afternoon, and watching the racing, and there's I forget the name of that company back there with the smokestacks, etc. Here's a view from the grandstands in the 1920s, cars lining up for an afternoon of racing action. All set for auto races, Roby Speedway, Sunday, August 29th, 2 o'clock, $500. Some of the entries there shown, and I've got to learn how to use this silly thing. And there is a ticket stub from that first race, that inaugural season race, September 26, 1920. The best auto races of the season, Roby Speedway, again, October 10th, 1920. 3 new 1920 Fords to be given away. The track was taken over by Jack Leach and the Roby Speedway Association Group. Jack Leach was an Indian motorcycle dealer in Hammond. But Leach in 1922 put $10,000 of improvements into the Speedway. The opening event that year, 1922, and they did race in 1920, as I mentioned, and also in 1921, but then promoter Jack Leach took it over and kind of cleaned it up a little bit more and fixed it up, and they started having more races in 1922. And the first race was in June of 1922. A driver from Chicago, Eston Winston, won the Battle Royal race that afternoon. That was the first race of the 1922 season under the promotion of Jack Leach. Speaking of Eston Winston, there he is in his race car number 5. This picture wasn't taken at Roby Speedway. It was taken at another Midwest track. His Nelson Brothers Special was a front-running car for many, many years in racing. He unfortunately was killed in a crash. He was killed in a crash in 1925 down in Urbana, Illinois. Edward Brink, unfortunately, was the first Roby Speedway fatality, and that happened in August of 1922. Brink was from Indiana Harbor. Sonny Talamont, or Talamonte, as he was known, was from Chicago Heights. He captured the 50-mile championship finale in October of 1922. Talamont was a top driver. Unfortunately, he met his maker in a crash at the Crown Point Fairgrounds track in 1926. And there's not a very good picture, but there's Sonny Talamont in his number 22 car, and on there, hard to see, but it says the spirit of Chicago Heights. He was well liked and revered in the Chicago Heights area. Roby Speedway, auto races, Sunday, June 11th. It's reopening. This is 1922, and it tells you all about it, the $10,000 worth of improvements. And gallons of oil and water have been placed on the 1 mile track to make it race ready. Steamroller has been used, etc., etc. Signed J.E. Leach, manager. $1.10 to get in that afternoon, free parking. And there's promoter Jack Leach on the right, and he was known for wearing knickers back in the day. He's pictured there with race car driver Walter Martin. Cliff Woodbury, he was an early winner and runner at Roby Speedway. He was from Chicago. Him and his brother Elmer operated a auto repair shop out on Madison Street. There it is. Whoops, wrong. Right there, 4918 Madison Street in Chicago. And Cliff Woodbury was a top runner in dirt track competition, then moved into the Indianapolis 500 cars, did quite well, got a top 6 finish in one race, but he was injured in, I forget, 1931, 32 at a track, and that pretty much ended his racing career. But Cliff Woodbury raced all throughout the Middle West and was a winner at Roby in the early years. Here's Roby in 1923, big sign, Dodge Brothers motor car signage there telling about the races in 1923. They're lining up for some racing action that day. There's the start-finish line. You can see the chalkboard of the names and numbers for the lineups. Kind of a neat shot there from back in 1923 at Roby. Rance Olds was the second fatality when he was killed in a qualifying trials run on June 10th, 1923. Chicago's Cliff Woodbury, we saw a picture of him here just a second ago. He was the dominant driver at Roby in 1923, winning a bunch of races, including 2 season-ending 50-milers in 23 and 24. 1924, let's do the math. What year? Okay, it's 100 years ago. Rance Olds, there's a picture of him, a racer that unfortunately met his end at Roby Speedway. Kind of a hard photo to see here, but there's a program from 1923, cover of the official program for the auto races at Roby Speedway. Ralph De Palma, who was a top Indianapolis car driver during the years, his picture graces the cover, but I don't think Ralph De Palma ever raced at Roby Speedway. I'm not sure, but I kind of had that hunch. Sam Davis, local driver, number 999 car getting pushed off in 1923. Again, a nice shot of the track pit area. There's some of the pit. They have the pit area, the driver's name and the car number and the car it is itself in that photo. Another great shot. Somebody took these, Jerry Morowski, somewhere along the line, got these photos, acquired these photos. There's just some neat pictures. You see the guys down there and some of them wearing their fedoras and the newspaper boy caps, ready to watch some racing at Roby Speedway in the afternoon of 1923. Drivers getting ready, 1920 style. And you can see some of the grandstands, the drivers, the cars, the crews. Promoter Jack Leach right there with his ever-present knickers. One thing, if you've been around racing, and I have for, 50 plus years, you don't see a lot of fan protection here. It looks like the track is right there. There's kind of a guardrail. There's a wall, but a wheel or whatever, or some parts of the car could fly into the stands. Not a lot of protection for race fans back in the 1920s and 30s. Come to the races at your own risk, possibly, was the motto. Another program ad. The Durant Special, Durant Motors, having the front page, or the front cover even, of the Roby Speedway program in 1923. Unfortunately, the color and the photograph isn't really that good. I apologize for kind of hard to see. Here's a pit scene in 1926, and you can see the stalls and Marlin Oil's truck there for helping out. And pit scene, the cars have kind of an individual little spot there, fenced off from their competitors. A lot of guys hanging around there, ready for the races to start. Another good picture of Roby Speedway from back in the day. Here we go, a view from the officials' tower in 1923. They're coming down, smoke, racing. See some fans standing outside the track. This is coming off of turn 4, coming down the main straightaway, fans watching the races. I can't imagine just what that was like back 100 years or so ago. I mean, just the noise, the spectacle, the smoke, it had to be great. Well, for at least some of us. Fellow by the name of Nick Crowley and his friends. I see possibly his daughter, a dog or a cat in there, and another guy behind the wheel. But look, it's an early Roby car, but look at the wheels. They look like spoke wheels. Kind of dangerous as you clip along 100 miles an hour or so down the straightaway at the big speedway. Sam Davis was another local driver. Again, he drove the number 999 car, the GNS Roaggio Special. Won some races over the years. Here's the crew looking at the car. One crew member was kind of concerned up there. Oh boy, I hope it makes it through today. And now we're talking, instead of wooden wheels, we've got the spoke wheels. The thing to use in racing back then, Indianapolis, etc. Al Karp, his name was Al Kraszewski. He owned a gas station or garage there at South Chicago Avenue in Colfax back in the day, the 1920s and 30s. Al Karp was a racer. Him and his brothers had this Red Crown gasoline station, and Al was a racer. He liked to race the cars at different tracks, especially Roby Speedway. He had this garage, and he kind of made it into a little hotel and a little bar area in the back, and drivers would come in for the weekend, come in maybe Saturday during the day to race on Sunday at Roby, and Al would have kind of, a couple of spots, some cots, etc., for them to take it easy and have a cocktail or two and then go to bed and get ready for the races the next day. There's Al Karp, gentleman in the white coveralls, in his wreck number 999 at Roby Speedway. He was driving that day the 999 car and got torn up. And Al Kraszewski, he was the uncle of Jerry Morawski. And that's how Jerry kind of got involved in this automobile racing thing, especially the history of Roby Speedway through his uncle Al Karp and others. I think Bulldog Brewery down the street has this photograph on one of their beers down there that they produce. Harry Orbeck from the Calumet Auto Repair was also a big funder of the racing. Sam Davis, again, behind the wheel of that 999 car. Al Karp there. Harry Orbeck's the fellow with the fedora standing there behind the car. Look at the people there. This is just a portion of the grandstands there at Roby Speedway. A lot of people wanting to watch races back in the 20s. There's the GNS Motor Company crew, another 999 car. How would you like to be sitting in that cockpit of that car, holding that steering wheel and wrestling that thing around 70, 80, 90 miles an hour on a big mile dirt track? Dust, ruts. Sounds like a lot of fun. There's the GNS Motor Companies in South Chicago on Commercial Avenue back in the day. And a guy named Ed Hockler, a driver, he jumped in the seat for this photo. There's Ed. This is Eston Winston right there with the straw hat, holding the straw hat. There's Al Karp getting his picture, and some other guys, a couple of kids from the neighborhood there getting their picture there. And this was a Roaggio. It was one of the top running cars, style cars back in the era. GNS Motor Company out there at 880204 Commercial Avenue. They were a local Ford dealer back in the day, and they supported auto racing at Roby Speedway. Another view from the grandstands. This is 1924. This would be a great shot if the fellow would have stood up and took the picture or told the guy in front. Hey, bend down a little bit. I want to get a couple of shots here. But this kind of gives you it's hard. It's not the best quality photo, but you can see in the background, there's the track and some of the early buildings and houses, and it's a neat picture. The cars getting pushed off, and that's how they started those cars back in the day. They push them and get them going. Here's a guy already started and smoking and getting going. But they later they would put a rope behind a car, or a tow vehicle, a truck, a car, or whatever, and the driver would hold that rope and they'd pull the car down the track, and as soon as the car in gear, popped it into gear, and off they went. It started, and the driver would release the rope and go racing. The Roby Inn was a long-time establishment. This was right outside. This was in the first turn area, outside the first turn area, so that would be the northeast corner of Roby Speedway property. And they promoted the races. You can see the next race, September the 12th, the Roby Inn, specializing in fish and chicken dinners, open year-round, kind of a landmark there in the early years of the Roby area. 1920s racing again, wheel-to-wheel action at Roby Speedway in Hammond, Indiana. 1925, an ad out of Times newspaper, I believe, 100-mile national championship auto race, September 27th, $1.10 to get in, plenty of free parking. Cliff Woodbury, we've mentioned him before. In addition to Leslie Bugs Allen from Chicago and Ray Campbell of Detroit were winners of major races at Roby in 1925. Allen was a winner of a 100-mile event on October 18th, 1925. Allen, along with Charles Dutch Bauman of Indianapolis, Louis Snyder and Wilbur Shaw, both Indianapolis 500 winners, were among race winners in 1926. Allen's win was a 150-mile season finale in late October of 26. Here's a typical race car, getting now in the mid-20s to going into the 1930s. This is Howdy Wilcox. He was from Indianapolis, from the area there. And that's your typical Roby car, with spoked wheels, sitting in the cockpit, ready to go racing. Getting them started at Roby. This is an earlier shot, because you can tell there's right here, there's no tail of the car. It's just a bobtail type car, really kind of a primitive looking piece of equipment, but they were racing. And again, the crowd, look at the crowd there at Roby Speedway back in the day. Louis Snyder, he won in 1927. He was a winner. There's his car, the car number 1. He was a national racer, a national championship type driver, won the Indianapolis 500. And they'd come from wherever, Indiana, Iowa, the Chicago area, Wisconsin, to race at Roby Speedway. A lineup for a 1927 program: Louis Snyder, Charles Dutch Bauman, D. Morris, Shorty Cantlin, Jack Petticourt, a lot of names, Cliff Bourget, another 500 driver, Fred Frame was a 500 racer, Wilbur Shaw. I mean, there's a lot of talent listed here on this program page from 1927. This is ready to go racing. Wilbur Shaw, 3-time winner at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He won in, I can't remember now, but he was a 3-time winner. And here he is at Roby Speedway, 1927, before his victories at Indianapolis. Interesting fact, he was a racer at Indianapolis for many, many years, started his career on dirt tracks like the Roby Oval, and then after his racing career was over, he became the president of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. When Tony Holman bought the track in 1945, right after the war, and racing resumed, Wilbur Shaw was the fellow behind the scenes that pushed Tony Holman to buy that racetrack that was kind of in disrepair. It was a brick track, weeds growing, grass and weeds growing through it. Unfortunately, Wilbur Shaw was killed in an airplane crash in 1954. Some pictures out of a 1927 program, some personality shots, I'll call them. There's Les Bugs Allen and Cliff Woodbury in their cars, Walter Martins and Eddie Verback, Earl Phillips, D.D. Morris. Love the helmet there of D.D. Morris. Look at that. A lot of protection there. It looks like a cloth helmet. It's got the goggles though, he'll protect his eyes. But the goggles were made of glass. I mean, a rock would hit the glass and get into the guy's eye and cut him up, and exciting. Unless you were the driver. Some ads from a 1927 program, Roby Speedway program, Elcar, the Elcar car, and Rockford Motor Sales on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, and Warshawski Auto Parts there on State Street in Chicago. How many people remember Warshawski's? They used to send out those neat catalogs, and boy, you look through those, and they had all kinds of high-performance parts, replacement parts, and part of automobiles and automobile racing in the Chicago area for many, many, many years. The American Automobile Association began sanctioning the races at Roby Speedway in 19. Automobile Association, AAA, as we'll call it, was the sanctioning body for major races throughout the country, primarily the Indianapolis type car circuit, and they ruled with an iron hand. They didn't want their drivers going to Timbuktu Speedway to race on an opening weekend. No, 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 no. You will race only AAA, and that was kind of the rules for many, many years. I mean, into the 50s even, when AAA ran the races. George Souders was the winner. He won the 500, the Indianapolis 500. George Souders, I should say, won that 1927 500, and in July of 1927, that same year, won a 75-lap race at the Roby track. October 7th, 1928, we're jumping up ahead. Wisconsin's Tootie Marchese won a 150-mile event. Marchese and his Frontiac won by 7 laps, so he had the field covered that day. Marchese, the name Marchese is, for race fans, his brother Tom Marchese was a longtime promoter at the Milwaukee Mile State Fair Park Speedway up there in Milwaukee. 5,000 fans which witnessed Charles Wiggins from Indianapolis winning a 40-mile national dirt track colored championship race on August 26, 1928. And for sure there were 2 races that were strictly for the national dirt track colored championship circuit. In 1928, Charles Wiggins was the winner over Chicago's Bill Carlson. Brian Salbaugh at Roby, he was another top runner at Roby, won some races out there, pictured after the race. Not the best photograph, but he was one of the front runners, unfortunately. He raced Indianapolis later and then perished in a crash on the West Coast later, ending his career. There's that George Souders hits 75-mile average to win Roby race, and Shorty Cantlin second, Jack Petticourt, I should say, third. And again, he had won the Indianapolis 500. A month and a half later, he's at Roby Speedway here, winning a race, AAA race. There's Milwaukee's Carl Marchese. We kind of mentioned him. Marchese Brothers Garage sponsored car, but Carl Marchese was one of the top promoters in the Midwest. He ran the races there at the Milwaukee Mile for many, many, many years. Shorty Campman's car in 1930 kind of shown there at Roby Speedway, some fans gatherings. See the grandstands in the background. And Shorty Campman's car was kind of called a voodoo wagon because it was in several accidents over the course of racing at Roby and other tracks. It was like, you're going to get in this car and you're probably going to be in an accident. And Shorty proved the point. And there's the car, the voodoo wagon, wrecked in at Roby. And this kind of gives you an idea of the surrounding area in the infield. You can see a lot of wetlands and swampy looking area and the grass, etc. That was part of the Roby infield back in the day. Grandstands full for another afternoon of racing. There's the start-finish line and the starters stand right there, and fans there kind of waiting to go racing. Coming down the main straightaway at Roby again. Unfortunately, a lot of the photos that we've gathered over the years are kind of from that 1925 to 1930 era. The photographs from the track are really hard to come by. Iowa's Gus Schrader scored victories, 3 of them in 1929, And Gus Schrader was a Hall of Fame racer, didn't do much at the Indianapolis Speedway, but he was the top guy at dirt track racing throughout the Midwest. He raced all over the country, at county fairs, state fairs, on dirt tracks. He was like almost unbeatable when it came to dirt track racing. A fellow by the name of Ralph Miller from Hammond won a 250-mile stock car race in September of 1929. I can't imagine racing 250 miles, 250 laps on a dirt track. That had to be just, you had to be just, not crazy, but you had to really be in great shape to get that job done. Veteran driver Lionel Whitaker of Hammond captured a 100-mile stock car race in 1929 later in the season in October. Unfortunately, Bud Dagler of Fort Wayne was injured during morning practice, and he passed away the next day, or a few days later, I should say. Emil Johnson, early stock car winner there at Roby, and his son is with us today. Good to see him. He was a winner of several big events at the Roby Oval and stock cars. You're talking 1929 or so, 1930. These are the first stock car racers in the Midwest, in the Chicago area for that matter also. Emil was from over in the Gary area, won a lot of races, and great to see his son again here today. Lester Gillis, better known as Babyface Nelson, is believed to have raced at Roby Speedway around 1930. And here's a quote from a car owner, Clarence Leiter, said about Gillis, "One of the best drivers I've ever seen. Unfortunately, he was a bank robber and a murderer and was gunned down by authorities in 1934. So you can see, you know, automobile racing, this auto racing society, they didn't really care. You know, he had a little black mark on it. Yeah, it's okay. Come out and race with us. Yet just keep your guns in the pits. Don't, you know. Frank Swigert of Indianapolis, won the rain shortened at 68 miles Western Championship race in June of 1930. Unfortunately, a tragic accident happened. A plane crashed and killed 3 people, a husband, a wife, and a granddaughter. The mother of the child was seriously injured. The crash occurred off of turn 3 outside the Speedway property. And the story goes, it was like 112th and State Line or in that area, just a field, and it rained. And of course it rained, I don't know if it rained prior to this, that the race had to be canceled, shortened up. The story goes that it was an airplane or an Army airplane, and the pilot tried several times to get the plane to take off. Muddy conditions, here you are trying to run this plane down on a dirt field that's all saturated with rain. And the plane just did not get up in the air, gain altitude, and it crashed into these people's cars. Several cars, killing these 3 people and injuring the daughter. There's the headline from the Lake County Times back in the day. The airplane kills 3 at Roby Race Oval. And Roby got kind of a bad deal on that, a bad reputation from that because, okay, somebody borrowed the plane. Matter of fact, it was an Army Reserve plane that the fellow borrowed, flew to Roby, landed in that field, rain, poor conditions to take off. It just, you know, was kind of a nightmare ready to happen. And here's another picture of that. And there's the family, Peter Brockman, his wife, Catherine, and daughter, Ernestine. She was injured, and unfortunately, Virginia, the granddaughter, was killed in that. The plane just crashed into the car, and you can imagine what a prop plane would do to an automobile. And the pilot was Wilson Newhall. He borrowed this plane. He was a lieutenant in the reserves, I believe, and he borrowed the plane, and it's just an unfortunate day in Roby Speedway history. June 1934, cars lining up for action, ready to go racing. Now we're in the 30s. During the Depression, of course, money was tight. Cars were limited. The type of cars that they were racing were limited as far as quality and dollars and cents available to put into a race car. 1931 Indianapolis 500 winner, Louis Snyder, won a 100-mile AAA race on June 21st, 1931. Again, win Indianapolis on May 30th, come to Roby Speedway and race and win again. Chicago's Art Foley won a 100-mile, or it was a 10-mile season finale in late 1932. Unfortunately, Art Plackey, age 23, died from injuries suffered in a crash during that race. Here's the Jones-Whitaker special, just kind of standing there and ready to go racing at Roby. You can see kind of keeps the fenced area there, keeping the fans back a little bit from the race cars in the pit area. And there's the Jones-Whitaker special wreck sitting in the swamp over there at Roby in the infield. Drivers and crew getting ready to go racing. There's a tow truck, etc., etc. Again, the tow truck would pull that rope, tie a rope around the back, driver hold on, boom, 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 and start up and start rolling along. Crashes at Roby, or crash at Roby, these were numerous too. Car flipped over, this I think was coming off of turn 2 on the back straightaway at Roby. Car kind of clipping along there. Somebody was fortunate to grab a photo. Don't know who the driver was, don't know what the outcome was. Wild Bill Cummings, 1931, driving the Boyle Product Special. He's there on the far right, getting ready to jump in the cockpit and go racing. Wild Bill Cummings, he was an Indianapolis 500 winner. Also, Boyle Product Special. Mike Boyle was a Chicago union head, and he supported and sponsored and owned race cars for many, many years. Mike Boyle from Chicago. There's the Jinx Special. Here's a Roby car from 1930. Looks like a mechanic getting it ready, checking it out, ready to get racing. Billy Arnold, he was from Chicago, from the Hyde Park area. He was a 1930 Indianapolis 500 winner. And the story goes that when he was winning the 1930 Indianapolis 500 and he dominated the race, he led like 198 laps of 200. Somebody stole his passenger car up the street of Indianapolis. That's a story I heard. But Billy Arnold, this is 1932. He won the 500 in 1930, but he got in an accident in 1931. So comes 1932, he's practicing at Roby Speedway in the spring of that 32 season. Just getting back into shape. Can I do it again? He was pretty badly injured in 31, so he's testing his skills. Do I still have it? And he did race in 32 again. And there's kind of the celebration here. We're waving a flag. I don't think that's a checkered flag. Maybe it's the green flag. Step on the gas there, Bill, and get going. But you can see the stand's empty. Just a couple of mechanics and bystanders watching Billy Arnold practice in 1932 at Roby Speedway. AAA championship event. This in 1932, June 19th, 1932, this is the one and only national championship race sanctioned by AAA, counting towards the national championship points that was ever held at Roby Speedway. Driver Stubby Stubblefield from Los Angeles won the 100-mile race. He beat Al Gordon and Wild Bill Cummings. He raced the Gilmore Lions Special to victory in a 100-lap race, averaged 76 plus miles per hour. Took an hour and 18 minutes to get the race completed. But this was the one and only points race for the national championship IndyCar type racing that was ever held at Roby Speedway. And here is a picture of the 1932 race, cars lining up. The number 15 car right there is that Stubblefield winning machine. And there's a better picture of what the car looked like. That's at Indianapolis in 1932. These were two-man cars now. For an era there in the late 20s into the early 30s, they had a riding mechanic, so you had 2 men to each car. And the mechanic was, to check the tire wear on the car, the tires on the right rear, and trying to pump the fuel pressure, keep that up. checking the other gauges on the car for the driver and maybe bumping them. Here comes Speedy Racer coming by you. We better, get out of the way because he's coming. But Stubby Stubblefield won that 32 race at Roby. And there's you can see it was a Gilmore car out of California with the fin on the back. Kind of a neat piece for 1932. Chicago newspaper story kind of got folded up over the years, but there's a picture of Stubblefield, and he had a writing mechanic that day, and he's getting the checkered flag from the starter, and the fans are in the stands, and there he is on the far lower right after the race, kind of oiled and dirt-stained face, but he's happy as a lark. Unfortunately, Stubby was killed in a time trials or practice crash at Indianapolis several years later. Again, another story from the Chicago Tribune, after he had won the big race at Roby Speedway. This was a lot of national attention was brought to the Roby Speedway because of this race. For Roby Speedway, 1932, these pictures are from the Peter Lopez collection, and his dad owned Universal Auto Repair shop on Mackinac Avenue in Chicago, and basically the Universal Auto Repair gang would go out to the races, to Roby, just to provide a tow truck or whatever for the races, maybe sneak in a couple of the guys, and Pete Lopez, a young man at the time, was part of that gang. And these are some pictures that Peter took of Roby, a pit shot. You can see how the track, there's the track, and there's the power station, and there's the old beer brewery, and it gives you an idea of how the car's headed into turn one there at 108th Street. Another shot from along the front stretch. There's the power station again in the background. One of the Marchese Miller cars there. I mean, they drew a lot of good cars and a lot of good drivers, great drivers there at Roby during its existence. Early stock cars, 1932. People talk about stock car racing, and I'm kind of a fan of it. And, stock car races came to Chicago first at Raceway Park or Gill Stadium in Chicago or Soldier Field. But as we've mentioned here, you can go back to as early as 1929, 1930 for some of the first stock car races. And the cars look stock to me. Maybe the fenders are taken off and the windshields removed. But I don't know if I had a car, if I wanted to make it number 13 though. Guy was probably not superstitious at all. Here's another shot that Pete Lopez took in 1932 at the National Championship race. Fred Frame there and Joe Russo, both top racers back in the day, ready to go racing there at Roby. And you can see the pit guys and everybody kind of getting ready for the races. Again, Russo and Frame, they were two top runners. Another crash. This is from 1932 on the back stretch, the high fence. Read a story about Roby one time that the young kids would kind of hang out on the back straightaway at Roby. And if a car crashed, and several did, through the fence, there'd be a big opening in the fence. Well, these youngsters would say, hey, we don't have enough money to get paid to get in, so we'll just wait for a car or two to come by. And I guess some of them, there was a high line or a telephone pole or something on the backstretch, so they kind of watched the races from there. But once somebody whacked it and went through the fence, hey, it's open, let's go. And they'd have a great seat to watch the races in the inside of Roby Speedway. Studebaker entry from 1932, again, these are some shots from Peter Lopez. And as we mentioned, they crashed a lot there at Roby during its years of racing, and another car kind of torn up. This one looks kind of torn up pretty good. Looks like the steering wheel and the cockpit took its toll. Getting ready for another afternoon of racing. And again, it was pretty simple. The track, a little guardrail possibly, and then the fence, but not a lot of protection for race fans. And they should have done something about the weeds here. They should have Track crew should have got those earlier in the week. In the background is that Universal Auto Repair Shop tow truck. And I believe the young man behind there and kind of smiling is Pete Lopez. Went to school with my dad. And here's my Uncle Mike Markovich. He was part of that Universal gang going to the races. Uncle Mike was a big race fan, would tell you about Roby, tell you about Indianapolis, etc. But he just jumped in the car one day, this number 8 car, he didn't race it. He just jumped in, hey, take my picture, and there we got a picture of Uncle Mike looking pretty racy back in the day. Again, some drivers and crews. Neat shot of the starter stand. The stand stood out a little bit over the racetrack a little bit, so the drivers could see the starter and his flags. Long before safety lights, caution lights around the speedway and all that. It's just they might have had a flag man in the turns, and if they saw the starter, the official starter up in the starter stand waving the yellow flag, well, oh yeah, there's a wreck here, throw a yellow, and I'll somebody go out there and wave another yellow flag just to slow the drivers down. More Roby cars and drivers. George Connor, he was an Indianapolis 500 racer and also a Roby Speedway competitor. He's shown here in 1935 at the Speedway. Again, it's a two-man car. The driver, George Connor there on the left, and his riding mechanic. More double or two-man car pictures. Ira Hall was another front runner. Another guy that raced a lot throughout the Middle West. And Wilbur Shaw, we mentioned him as a 3-time Indianapolis 500 winner. Again, it's a two-man car, 1934. Kelly Patello, Indy, 1934. Again, two-man car. Patello was an Indy 500 winner, kind of a character. Basically got into a lot of trouble outside the racetrack. Duke Neyland, he was from the Chicago area. At Indy, 1940, the Marks special car. And the Marks family, they were out of Gary, Indiana. They were entries at Indianapolis and had cars at Roby for many years. Harry McQuinn, another top racer in the big cars or the Roby type cars, also raced a lot and won a lot in midgets during his career, and raced at Indianapolis. And then after his racing career was done behind the wheel, he became the race director at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Talk about first cars, and here's a picture of a car from Red Bosher's scrapbook, a photo of his first race car that he was ready to race at Roby Speedway on July 4th, 1933. And Red Bosher wasn't known for much racing at Roby, but he did a lot of racing in midgets in the Chicagoland area later. Cass Casimir's number 35. This is a classic example. Cass is from Hammond. He owns this car and found this car in the Blue Island area a number of years ago, and this is how he found it. And this was a typical classic example of a Roby Speedway car from the late 20s and into the 30s. Charles Wiggins, we mentioned him earlier. He won another 100-mile black race in September 1933. Unfortunately, Gil Cunningham was killed in an accident during the program. Gil Cunningham was a taxi driver during the week in Chicago. Chicago's Jimmy Snyder closed out the 1933 season with a 100-lap victory in October of 33, October 8th. Jimmy Snyder, another driver, I'll mention him real quick. He raced local tracks. He was from Chicago. He played professional football for a couple of games. He was a milkman at one time over on 63rd Street in that area of Chicago. And he was a top midget racer around the area here in Chicago and other places, and then ran the bigger cars also. And he was on his way to being a top-notch Indianapolis 500 driver. He raced a couple of years, I think 36, 37, or 38 And in 1939, his car was fast, a car to beat. He didn't win the 500. I think he got second or third. And a month and a half later, he was dead, killed in a midget crash down in southern Illinois. Another newcomer, Dennis Duke Nayland. He's from Chicago. He won the 10th annual 50-mile race, the big race at Roby in 1934. He was a former steel worker here in northwest Indiana. And he came back and won a 100-lap season finale later in October of 1934. Story goes that Nayland, who was just kind of a guy, had a helmet and ready to race, never raced until he won that event on September 2nd. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what race historians will tell you, that first time behind the wheel of a race car and he wins. So he definitely had some talent. Again, Duke Nayland, longtime Indianapolis 500 racer, was the kind of connected with the famous Novi race cars, which were just powerful race cars at Indianapolis, but just seemed to always have bad luck. Vogel's fish, chicken, and steak dinners on the front page of our souvenir program from 1934. Dine and Dance at Vogel's, Calumet Avenue near Sheffield, Hammond. Mechanics Pit Pass from 1935. And I really thought that pit passes like these were really cool. I collected some of them, even had some that I got when I went to the races at different tracks. But this thing, you could see it, hold it, had the little string that you put on your trouser, belt buckle area, and it was just kind of a neat piece of art, a piece of memorabilia. Nowadays, you go to the races and they just either stamp your hands with a ink stamp or put an armband around you, and by the end of the night, that armband's pretty well worn out. But there we are, 1935, the new Roby Speedway, pit mechanic pit pass. New promoters took over. Jack Leach kind of gave it up, and Emmett T. Howard and Carl Stockholm took over the track for the 1935 season. Carl Stockholm was a World War I veteran, was a bicycle racer, and also owned and operated a big cleaning company in Chicago. But him and Stockholm and Howard became the promoters of the Roby Speedway. This is 1935, and we're getting down to the final years of racing at this 1 mile track. A fellow by the name of Albert Babe Stapp. He was from California. He dominated the 1935 season at Roby, and there was just these 3 AAA sanctioned races held that year, and he was the winner. There's a picture of Babe Stapp, 3 wins in 1935, as we mentioned. He was an Indianapolis 500 competitor also, and he just dominated the racing in 1935 there at Roby. One of the cars, this 2-man car, I'm not sure if this is true, but if he won in this car in September of 35, but there he is in a 2-man car at Indianapolis. I believe this is the car he won those races at Roby in 1935. Some ads out of some programs, or should say newspaper ads, and again they're talking about Babe Stapp, again the big Roby winner, Frank Briscoe's second, and Nemo Andre's third. Just some neat little memorabilia that Jerry Morawski and myself have collected over the years. Here's this picture looks better when it's on the computer, but in 2007, I believe, this trophy was 2007, it's right there in front of my nose. 2007, this trophy, or what's left of it, was found in a wooded area in Indiana. And it was used for target practice. You can see all the holes. I mean, all the holes and banged up, Here's this trophy, cup that Babe Stapp worked hard to win at Roby, and somebody took it out into the field and shot it all up. So it was found in 2007, and a couple of years later, Susanna Stapp, who was Babe Stapp's granddaughter, brought this to, I think, the first time Jerry Morawski and myself did a presentation on Roby Speedway. And she brought that trophy, and we got the photo of it, and it engraved, it said right on Loving Cup there, Roby Speedway 100-mile Midwest Championship, September 29th, 1935, won by Babe Stab driving the Burrung Special. Now it's 1936. There's a souvenir program. This is the new Roby Speedway. Management of Carl Stockholm, giving a couple of phone numbers. Let's try that number at the office. Van Buren, 1022. And they called it the new Roby Speedway, and they used that name a lot. The adjective new, different promoters, different racing. And here is Carl Stockholm in 1936. This is kind of coming to the end of racing at Roby Speedway. There's another neat shot of the track. It shows you going down there into turn 1 through turns 1 and 2. The power station right there. The old brewery area right there. We mentioned the Roby Inn, which would have probably been like right outside the racetrack, outside of the grandstands in turn 1. And there's the fans in the stands, you know, with various headwear and kind of neat. And I think I don't know if this picture shows even an Andy Frena shirt or two in the picture. Somehow this picture doesn't look, it's out of focus, and I apologize for this. Another program cover from 1936. First turn action at Roby. And they, extended the stands. They built new stands. When Stockholm took over, they built new stands, higher stands, more people in the grandstands. And here's the cars roaring into turn 1. Grandstands full on a Sunday afternoon of racing. Drivers, going wheel to wheel out there on that 1-mile dirt track. Talking about wheel to wheel, well, maybe only 3 wheels. Frank McCurk getting the checkered flag in 1936, and you can see he's missing a wheel there on the left rear. But he completed the race and finished, and the stands you can see over here are a little higher. Still have the fans watching here off of turn 4 and down the main straightaway at the beginning of the main straightaway. And I think this was just he didn't win, but I think he was one of the top runners finishing the race though on 3 wheels. California's Rex Mays, and my Uncle Mike, who I mentioned earlier, he talked about Rex Mays quite a bit. He won 3 of the last 4 races ever held at Roby Speedway, the last race being September 20th, 1936. About 10,000 fans were on hand that last race. He defeated Ted Horn and Frank Briscoe in a 50-lap race. Unfortunately, Ray Pixley from the Washington State area passed away from injuries suffered in a crash that day. Ray Pixley, unfortunately, finished I think 6th in the Indianapolis 500 in May of that year, and unfortunately was killed in that wreck at Roby. Here's a page from a 1936 program featuring Emil Andres and Harry McQuinn and Rex Mays. And there's 3 top drivers. Emil Andres was from the Chicago area, McQuinn from the Indianapolis area, and Rex Mays from California. Those guys could get the job done. An ad from, or I should say, newspaper story, headline, Rex Mays wins 50-mile race at Roby Speedway. 17,000 fans watch the Californian lead all the way. It was June of 1936. It could have been the opening race of the season at Roby. Again, Rex Mays wins 50-mile race at Roby. Breaks track record in 10-mile event, July of 1936, July 5th. And the final race, date line is 8:30. August 31st, August 30th race, Chicago Tribune headline, Ray Pixley is killed in an auto race at Roby, loses control of car as some 20,000 fans look on. And there's a photo of the Pixley crash, 1936, the car number 44. The car was out of Chicago area, out of Chicagoland area, the Jeter Hesso, it was called, and it claimed Ray Pixley's life. And there they are, the crews and people getting the car ready to tow off the racetrack. Billy Wynn, he was the winner of the fourth race. Won one out of the four. Rex Mays won three, and Billy Wynn was a winner on August 30th, 1936. Ad for the last race, 1936. Roby Speedway, 108th Street and Indianapolis Boulevard, where champions race, AAA sanctioned, Sunday, September 20th. Bleachers and infield $1.10. If you wanted a good seat in the grandstands, it was $1.65. And again, promoting free parking. Again, going to September 20th, 1936. This is a headline from the Chicago paper, Chicago Tribune. 5 injured as Mays wins at Roby Speedway. Hurling wheel crashes into the crowd. And the story goes, and of course, I'm not knocking newspapers, but they always seem to come up with the sensationalism when there's death or injury in automobile racing. At least that was kind of the thought process back in the day. Headline reads, Father juggles child from path of flying wheel. And a fellow by the name of Alfred Tatina from South Crandon Avenue, 30 years old, saw the wheel coming, grabbed his daughter, pushed his daughter out of the way. He got hit by the wheel, the flying wheel, and suffered a broken hip, and it also says that 2 women and a man were slightly injured. Again, we talked earlier about the lack of safety for the race fan, and this is a perfect example. The irony of all this is that Hesso, number 44 car, the Jeter Hesso car that Ray Pixley died in, was the same car. They fixed it up, brought it back to the racetrack a few weeks later for this final race of the season. And Duke Neyland was driving it, and he lost the wheel, and the wheel took off and into the grandstands at Roby. Fortunately, just a broken hip from that could have been a lot worse. 23-year-old Rex Mays, he was the winner of that last race, 1936, September the 20th. That was the last race ever at Roby Speedway. They were going to run another race or two after this. Weather conditions forced the track management to cancel. And then there was even talk about, 1937, Carl Stockholm, there was talk at the end of the year, we're going to have more racing at Roby Speedway for the 37 season, and it never came about. Winners at Roby Speedway, I won't mention all the names, but I think 12 or 13 of these names, these drivers raced in the Indianapolis 500 over the years. Unfortunately, there were fatalities during the racing action at Roby. Edward Brink, Rance Olds, Chance Kinsley, Bud Dackler, Art Plackey, Dick Kroger, Gilmore Cunningham, and Ray Pixley. Those are the ones that we've been able to identify over the years. There's also one you can add to this. There was a gentleman and a friend took a joyride in a race car after the races were over one Sunday and flipped the car over and turned 4 area, and the driver was killed in that crash. But these are race driver fatalities at Roby Speedway. Kind of more of a current view of Roby. This is taken from 108th and State Line Road, several years ago, by the way. And it's that open field there, between 108th and 112th Street. State Line Road to the west, and I guess Walmart nowadays to the east of it. Another shot, more of a current view. Again, this was taken a number of years ago. You can still see the power station right there, the high line, the high power tension lines going through the property. And this is where it was. This was Roby Speedway. Big 1 mile racetrack, 108th through 112th Street, just west of Indianapolis Boulevard. This kind of gives you an idea a little bit. We put this together a couple of years ago, showing where that start-finish line was. I think Walmart has kind of come in here. Here's the Skyway or Indiana Tollway. and you kind of would get off, and this is kind of changed now. This used to be the 108, now it's kind of goes under the Skyway or the Indiana Tollway a little bit, and that's where it was. You know, we talked about the tragic accident, or the airplane accident that was probably right around in this area somewhere back in the day. But that kind of gives you an idea of where Roby Speedway was situated. And of course, there's been more progress, more building. Menards is in here, or Menards, Walmart, etc. is in here. A lot more building going on there in that area. I'd like to dedicate this presentation to my good friend Jerry Morawski. He was the racing historian. He was called the Roby Guy by a longtime writer in the Times newspaper, Archibald McKinley. He called Jerry the Roby Man. And there's a picture, this is taken, I believe, I know at one of the presentations several years ago, more than that, 10 years or so ago. Neat story about Jerry Morawski and Archibald McKinley. McKinley was a writer, columnist, longtime columnist for the Hammond Times, the Times newspaper. And Jerry and Archibald would talk and BS sometimes and just chit-chat. And Jerry told Archibald, he says, yeah, I was out at the Roby property the other day, kind of digging around, and I had a metal detector, and boy, I found a couple of pieces. I found a spark plug, and I found some nuts and bolts. And Jerry said, yeah, and he's just saying, these got to be from the Roby track. This, you know, maybe not. Maybe some guy dumped a bunch of garbage out there, but who knows? So Archibald McKinley gets the, oh, okay, Jerry, you found some stuff out there from Roby? Okay. So he writes in this column a little story about Roby and Jerry Morawski and says, yeah, Jerry Morawski, who lived in Chicago Heights at the time, he was out at the Roby property and he found a spark plug and some nuts and bolts, etc. No sooner the paper comes out, stories in the paper, people are out there with metal detectors, digging around, you know, looking for a piece of Roby Speedway memorabilia. But Jerry Morawski, without him, this presentation this afternoon couldn't have been possible. And that's it, the end. Thank you very much.